it is great to be with you, but I'm disappointed that I wasn't able to participate live. I've had to explore purchasing some land for a health community we're looking at developing, and had to do some international travel. So, I apologize not being there live with you. But the reason that I'm doing this is we know that there's an impending crisis coming with the Great Reset, and food is going to be a real issue. It's always an issue, but it's going to become even more so. Now, the globalists that are catalyzing this Great Reset, they have had a monopoly on food for a long time, and their intention is to make that even grow and become more so. And they started this process with the GMO seeds, and of course, the primary purpose of a GMO seed is to facilitate the integration and the use of glyphosate, a very potent, deadly herbicide that Dr. Stephanie Seneff, who is on this panel, is explored in great detail and has actually written a book on it. So I was one of the people early on who helped educate individuals 12, 15 years ago, because at that time, virtually no one knew the dangers of GMO seeds and glyphosate. And it's really, to understand what's coming, it's important to have an understanding of what happened the last century. And that is the food industry, and Monsanto specifically, was an effective lobbyist in changing the laws to essentially allow GMO foods to be substantially equivalent to real food that we were historically have always used. And the reason this is important, because if this is in place, then what they've done is essentially bypass the whole necessary and required infrastructure to do safety testing. Because in many ways, this is so similar to the tobacco industry. It's a pernicious, pervasive toxin that doesn't kill you immediately; it kills you slowly over time. So they got the legislative requirements in place last century, and now they're taking it forward. And I'm going to tell you exactly what they're doing, because what they have in store for every one of us is an equally serious health threat, because they're going to produce synthetic food, fake food. And they're going to make loads of cash on it, because the predicted market for this fake food market, $3 trillion. And there's even a report by the consulting firm McKinsey, which is a very big consulting firm. They're calling it the bio revolution, or synthetic bio, or synbio, as it's frequently called it. And they're predicting, McKinsey, that 60% of all the materials in the economy can be produced this way, especially the food you eat. And what type of food might that be? Well, we know what it is. It's fake meat, fake milk, and fat. And now we have Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat as examples of fake meat, and fake milk is just recently introduced by Bill Gates, the bio milk. And the first fake fat is actually out. It's now called cultured oil. So the plan is, by replacing these animal foods with patented lab-made alternatives, the globalists will have unprecedented power and control over our health. So all of these fake foods, the worst type of food you can eat is ultra processed, not just processed, but ultra processed. And all of these fake foods are ultra processed, full of synthetic chemicals. So, as I mentioned, the basic technologies to facilitate the introduction of this food into the food supply was done last century, and even the basic scientific technologies were established last century. So the real challenge, though, is to, what is the new technology? That's what I want to talk to you a little bit about today. And that is a term that's called precision fermentation. And this is a new technology that essentially that allows them to make this happen. It's the core fundamental technology. And what is it? It's a form of synthetic biology that has been around for several decades now, at least 20 years. And it uses genetically engineered microorganisms, such as yeast and bacteria, to produce these fake meats and fats and milk, which are some of the absolute most foundational foods that we can eat. Now, in order to pull this off, it's going to require the use of these genetically engineered microorganisms. And the new innovation is that these bacteria and yeast and microorganisms are using to grow the food. They're cultivated in very high-tech, sterile, pharmaceutical-grade, brewery-style fermentation tanks. Why do they require that? Because if they don't use this type of advanced technology, it's very easy to contaminate the cultures that are growing it. And once it's contaminated, they can't use it for anything. It just doesn't work. So there's a huge infrastructure investment of many billions of dollars that have been plowed into this technology. And this technology can actually create novel, new biochemical pathways that have never been seen in nature before. And frequently that doesn't go too well. Look at what happened with SARS-CoV-2. Now, what they've done is they've completely abandoned, just obliterated the precautionary principle with this thing. And they replaced it with their own globalist agenda, which is total control and world domination. And what easier way to do it than to take control of food supply? Now, let me share with you a recent personal experience I've had with precision fermentation. I think it's good because it's highly illustrative. What they've been able to do is produce fake fat to manipulate the narrative to convince very bright and well-respected individuals whose critical thinking skills normally would penetrate their massive veil of lies. So last year, I think it was early last year, it may have been the year before, but somewhere in that time frame, I was approached by a new startup called 0 Acres, and they had a new product which seemed really great. It's called cultured oil. And this is an area that, if any of you have been following me, you know is really near and dear to my heart, because it's being promoted to restaurants as an inexpensive alternative to seed oils, and even in the food industry. And these seed oils typically have 75% linoleic acid. And these new oils have less than 1% linoleic acid. And that's the level that you typically see in beef or ruminants. But it's even lower because typically that's 2 to 3%. So this is sounds really good. And if you haven't heard me talk about linoleic acid, definitely go online at my Substack, Take Control of Your Health, or just type it even in a good search engine. You'll find the dangers of this, because I believe it's one of the most pernicious toxins that are leading to the chronic epidemic disease of chronic degenerative diseases that we're experiencing. I've written extensively about it on my site, and I'm actually currently in the process of writing a review paper on the topic for a peer-reviewed journal. So anyway, that's the background. They came to me and said, sounds really, really good. We've got this oil that can replace all these dangerous seed oils. 1% LA, it's like perfect, except guess what they use to create this the cultured oil? Of course, precision fermentation. Sounds really good, doesn't it? Well, it does, and it's fooled many experts in this field, like Tucker Goodrich, who is really sharp about linoleic acid, but he drank their Kool-Aid, and he, like many others, believes that this precision fermentation is the best thing since sliced bread, and he's a big promoter of the product. So let me pull back the curtains and tell you what they're doing. This fake food industry, they're basically using terms like precision fermentation that everyone is familiar with to deceive us, because the reality is completely diametrically opposed from what the public understands this term to mean. So just like they did the same thing with COVID, they're changing the definition of basic terms and vocabulary. So they're using the term fermentation product and precision to make it sound even better than fermentation. The industry is trying to convince us that it's no different from any other fermented food that we're used to and had been used from time immemorial. Beer, yogurt, kimchi, all healthy foods. But what they fail to disclose is that the most often used microorganism in fake food precision fermentation is E. coli, which is a common bacteria. So but here's where it gets dicey. In addition to producing their desired product, in this case the the cultured oil, which is low in linoleic acid, the E. coli is likely spitting out any number of non-targeted metabolites that have completely unknown environmental consequences and potentially very toxic health effects. So this is in stark contrast to traditional fermentations processes, which produce waste products that are actually edible by animals or compostable, and they pose absolutely no biohazard or threat. So it's important to understand that the biowaste from genetically engineered synthetic biology fermentation products, what you have to do with them first is to deactivate them. And then they must be disposed of properly because it can't go into a landfill. So this is a clue that we're dealing with something potentially dangerous. Let me compare first to traditional fermentation, which is in stark contrast to, because for traditional fermentation produces waste products that are actually edible by animals and actually beneficial for health in many cases. They're compostable and they pose no biohazard. And the biowaste from these genetically engineered synthetic biology fermentation products, on the other hand, they just simply can't go into a landfill. So this is one of the reasons, why we just have to be ultra careful in here. And as I said, they facilitated this process last century when they were seeking to introduce, that was in the 70s and the 80s, where they knew they wanted this technology to be passed, and they were really slow and careful and methodical about it. And as a result, the laws are in place now to bypass any safety testing because they've been essentially labeled as equivalent, bioequivalent to real wholesome food. So, and it's not. It's just because what they're using too, and I neglected to mention earlier, is they're using some biotechnology that is relatively recent, like CRISPR-Cas9 technology. It uses an adenoviral vector that is used to actually produce the genetic editing. And we have no clue, and again, no required testing to determine the unintended consequences. They've just abandoned in every way, shape, or form the precautionary principle. And most likely the results will be deleterious to your health, no question. And just like smoking, you're not going to see it the first bite you eat and over the long term. But it's, and another point I wanted to mention is synthetic meats, why they're so harm, and I don't think most people really understand that, is that they're not creating cultured oil out of this. They are using, because that would be too expensive to do, so they wanted to make this inexpensive. But what they're doing is they're using the proteins coming from soy, but many times most soy oil is a seed oil, 60-70% linoleic acid. And they're using not only the protein from the soy, which is loaded, it's GMO soy, so it's loaded with glyphosate, but they're using the oil from the soy. So instead of having the saturated fats that you have in healthy animal products and ruminants that are raised regeneratively, you have not synthetic, but seed oils from plants. So it's just an absolute disaster in every way, shape, or form, not only just in a foundational macronutrient ratio, composition, because they're using seed oils to create meat. Meat is not seed oils. Meat is saturated fat. It's not polyunsaturated fat. So that's another reason why you want to stay away from this as far as you can, and really focus on the basics of foundational human nutrition, because that's what's going to get us through the Great Reset. So hopefully this information was helpful to you, and we can just be aware, stick to the basics, and avoid this stuff like the plague.